Welcome to another edition of Time About the Movies Flashback. Today we're flashing back to September 23rd, 1988 with 6 movies to look at. Let's go to the biggest movie that was released this weekend, and that is Jeremy Irons in David Cronenberg's follow-up, The Fly, Dead Ringers.
Imagine a twin who feels what you feel. You haven't had any experience until I've had it too, but does what you could never do. Radical technology was required.
You mean to say there's 2 of them?
David Cronenberg's Dead Ringers, a new thriller from the director of The Fly. Separation can be a bad thing. Dead Ringers, rated R.
Starts Friday, September 23rd at theaters everywhere.
So the story of Dead Ringers centers around these twin brothers known as the Mantle brothers. They're both doctors, both gynecologists, and identical twins. Mentally, however, one of them is more confident than the other and always manages to seduce the woman he meets. When he gets tired of his current partner, she is passed on to the other brother without her knowing. Everything runs smoothly until an actress visits the clinic, and the shy brother is the first to fall in love. Will they be able to share her, if you will? This is actually based on a story, a highly fictionalized version of the story of Stuart and Cyril Marcus, who were very much much like Jeremy Irons' character in this movie. They died together in July of 1975 at the age of 45 years old, and then they made a novel based off of this story called Twins by Barry Wood and Jack Geslin, and that's what this movie is based off of. This is kind of what I like to consider the point where good Lord, I just saw his name right there, David Cronenberg, where David Cronenberg basically took what he had, what the success that he had with Videodrome, Scanners, The Fly, and now with this film, kind of began the other David Cronenberg we're used to that would later come in the 90s, stuff like Naked Lunch, stuff like Crash, stuff like Existence, these bizarre, weird movies that have kind of a unique vibe to them, if you will. But this is a film that it's coming off of The Fly. The Fly was a massive success, so I guess a lot of people, when they saw this film, they didn't really know what to expect. They kind of were hoping for kind of the same thing that The Fly was, but in a way it's not, but in a way it kind of is. It's a deep, dark character study of these two guys who, one of them is a normal guy, and the other is pretty much a guy who likes to party around, and you don't really know how this is going to end up when it's all said and done. And when it gets to the payoff in this movie, it's really something interesting to see, and it's just like it's very, very. It's a deeply twisted film. It's a very interesting film on so many different ways. Boasted by a great performance by Jeremy Irons. You also have a really good performance by Genevieve Bougard as Claire, the woman that these two fall in love with, and it's a very interesting setup. It's a very interesting storyline, and it works in a lot of different ways. It's a weirdly put together film. It doesn't have quite that same bizarreness as something like The Fly does, because The Fly is just something that's just a whole another level on its own right. It doesn't have those insane levels that this movie does, but it's a very deep character study. It's a very interesting character study with two solid, different performances from one actor. Jeremy Irons, I think, like I said, does a phenomenal job in here. It doesn't quite have the same spark as The Fly does, but it definitely is one of Cronenberg's stronger films that is definitely worth the watch. If you haven't seen Dead Ringers, definitely check that one out. So that's Dead Ringers. So let's move on to our next film, and that is Matt Dillon, and I'm getting confused here today. Matt Dillon and Andrew McCarthy in Kansas.
They met by chance. One looking for love.
A lot of stuff has happened I can't talk about. Sometimes things aren't the way they look.
One looking for danger.
I get high. It's really unthinkable.
Both part of something neither can control.
We're not partners, we're not buddies, we're not friends.
Matt Dillon,
Are you with me now?
Andrew McCarthy, Kansas, rated R. Starts Friday.
So you have a story about a young man returning home to attend a wedding, hooking up with a drifter who turns out to be a violent bank robber. Before he knows it, the man finds himself involved in the robber's plans. And as the title indicates, this film is filmed all around Kansas with some shots in North Dakota. But that's really all I got to say about this movie, because it's not really an interesting film per se. Does not have a lot of good reviews. It was heavily criticized for being kind of a cliche-riddled mess of a film. And yeah, that's really all you can say about it. It just kind of feels like a been there, done that storyline that we've seen done over and over again. These are two really good actors. You know, Matt Dillon and Andrew McCarthy have shown they can work well in movies like this, but not when you have a story that's been there, done that. Like, it doesn't really have that hook that it really needs to really give it that oomph that it needs to really be something very special. it's just kind of there, and you can tell that this was made by one of those studios that just took whatever script that the studios passed on and just said, we'll take it because we can probably make something out of it. Who knows, maybe it might be a big hit, which this one clearly was not. A largely forgettable film, so not much more to say about that one. So let's move on to our next film, another largely forgettable film, but it has a huge cast, Sweetheart's Dance.
To say that sooner or later the right woman will come along and it'll all work out.
You're improving the quality of my life.
And I'm glad I didn't know you before this.
Fine, Sandy. What's my wife doing in your bed?
I wanted to have sex with him, but he didn't want to.
Why not? What's wrong with her?
You want to get married?
No.
No? I think it's possible my own mother was putting me on.
Don Johnson, Susan Sarandon, Jeff Daniels, Elizabeth Perkins. Sweetheart's Dance, rated R. Starts Friday in selected cities.
Story here about two small-town couples, one married for several years and the other at the beginning of their relationship. Kind of another big chill kind of movie that you're trying to turn into the next big chill. Directed by the guy who did Xanadu. He also did The Burning Bed. The only, Don Johnson, Susan Sarandon, Jeff Daniels, Elizabeth Perkins, you would think a movie like this would have something interesting about it with those people involved, but if the only memorable thing about this movie is the fact that Bernie Sanders has a cameo in this movie as a man giving out Halloween candy, that's really not a whole lot to say about a movie that features top talent like those four. And I guess Holly Marie Combs from Charmed as one of her early film performances in here. But other than that, though, it's a film that is the only positive things I can say about it is that the chemistry between the two couples is nicely done, but it's nothing special really. It's like a cut down version of The Big Chill, except it doesn't have anything that The Big Chill had that made it so unique and so incredible to watch. There's nothing really that interesting about this particular film, unfortunately. It's kind of just watching these two couples try to get through their relationships, and not really much happens. So yeah, and just like that, not much more to say about that one. It's not an interesting film per se. Sweetheart's Dance. So let's go ahead and move on to our next film, and that is Tim Daly and Kelly Preston in Spellbinder.
Jeff Mills is about to enter a world of passion.
You're welcome to stay at my place.
Seduction.
You've never been in love, and you're not sure you ever will be.
And darkness.
You will regret this for as long as you live.
What the hell is going on?
Nothing can break the spell. Spellbinder, rated R. Starts Friday. Check newspapers for a theater near you.
So the story here is that you have this woman who's being brutally assaulted by an abusive boyfriend, and this young lawyer rushes to her defense and crosses into a world of unimaginable evil. And on the surface, this woman is a dream come true, the perfect lover, a miracle healer, and a soulmate. But 2 days pass, and the guy realizes he's living in a nightmare when he realizes that she's a fugitive from the witch's coven to which he belongs, and they want her back. And back in time for human sacrifice by the unholy night of the winter solstice. This is a film that has such a really unique idea to it. It has two really good, talented young actors at the time, Tim Daly and Kelly Preston. So much potential here to make this work, and yet it's one of those movies that has a good concept, but not the great execution that it needs to. It's a real letdown too. I mean, you know what this kind of reminded me of? It kind of reminded me a little bit of Deadly Friend a little bit with Christy Swanson in it, Wes Craven's follow-up to Nightmare on Elm Street. But this one has at least some elements here that could be cool, some ideas that could be very interesting, but they never really deliver on them. It's kind of a story that just goes the way you expected it to go. It does have some interesting people behind the scenes. This director, Janet Greek, is best known for directing episodes of Babylon 5, and even the writer of this, Tracy Torme, has written episodes of Sliders and Star Trek The Next Generation. She was actually a writer on Saturday Night Live in the early 80s, and her other film work includes Fire in the Sky, which is a film we talked about in 1993. So there is interesting people behind the scenes who can make this work and have made it work down the road, but as far as this film goes, an interesting idea, just not the right execution overall. The performances by Tim Daly and Kelly Preston are fine enough, but they don't really go to that nth level to make this something that should be seen on its own as an underrated little gem here. It's just kind of could be much better than what it should have been, but yeah, not much more to say about that one. So that's Spellbinder. So let's go ahead and move on to our next film, Natasha Richardson in the story of Patty Hearst.
In 1974, a series of shocking incidents inspired a media circus.
There's a revolution going on in this country.
At 11:45 this morning, there was a bank robbery at the First Hibernia Bank of San Francisco. Witnesses
But what actually happened could only have been known by one person.
What are you gonna do to me?
Take off your blindfold.
Now, 14 years later, her story is about to be told.
Welcome. You're now the guerrilla fighter in the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Patty Hearst.
I finally figured out what my crime was. I lived. Big mistake.
Patty Hearst.
Of course, this is based on the story of Patricia Hearst, who was, of course, back in 1974, she was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and her transformation into an active follower of the SLA, and a long-lasting imprisonment and process of perpetrated brainwashing, and her final arrest after a series of armed robberies. You have Natasha Richardson, like I said, making her film. I believe this was her film debut. Like, could be wrong on that. Let me see. Let's see. Nope, I'm off. She's had a couple of uncredited appearances in the 60s and 70s as a little girl, but this is, I'm guessing this was one of her early film leading debuts. Maybe it is. Maybe because before this she did A Month in the Country and then Gothic. Maybe that was the one early on, but this was a relatively early film for her. Especially what she do later on down the road. You also have Bill Forsyth in here, Ving Rhames, Francis Fisher, Dana DeLady also shows up in here as well, and this is based off of Hearst's own autobiography of the same name. It's written by Nicholas Kazan, the son of Elia Kazan, and Paul Schrader directed this film, and at times the movie really does show itself as a really grounded, both shocking and funny portrayal of the story of how Patty Hearst became this person under this group, and why she eventually decided to essentially give it all up again at the end. But then at times it takes itself a little bit too seriously, and that's why I don't think a lot of people really gave it the proper credit that it deserves. Everyone gave Richardson a high praise for his performance, because this is a really good performance for her. She really did a good job of capturing what Patty Hearst was like in old news archives. If you ever watch the news archives of what happened with Patty Hearst and watch this performance by Richardson, she really is giving it her all in this performance. But other than that, though, it's a film that I think needed to get that, kind of like with some of the other movies we talked about this week, it needed that one little push to really make it something unique and special, and something that would make people want to talk about it for years and years to come. But as it is, it's one of Paul Schrader's more underrated works for sure, but it definitely could have been a whole lot better, considering what the subject matter and some of the stuff and the really good acting that takes place with the leading actress in here. Actually, this would be kind of interesting to see them try to do it nowadays. If you got somebody like Aaron Sorkin or David Fincher, somebody to do a story about this in a modern setting, or even somebody like Christopher Nolan, like somebody to give this a unique edge to it, kind of like what Nolan did with Oppenheimer, the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer. I think like this is going to be something that could really be something unique and different with a fresh perspective on it. But as it is, it's not a bad portrayal of the storyline. It definitely could have been a whole lot better. But as it is, it's not bad. I'd say definitely check it out, especially for Natasha Richardson's performance. I think it really is the best thing about the film. But yeah, it's one of those ones that definitely could have been a whole lot better, all things considered. So, with that said, on to the last one we have here, and that is Sigourney Weaver as Diane Fossey in Gorillas in the Mist.
Sigourney Weaver is Diane Fossey.
Diane, we can't stay on this mountain forever.
No!
Her heart would lead her to Africa. Her dream would become an obsession.
Are you responsible for kidnapping this animal?
Feel of saying, madam.
Her life would become legend.
This won't stop until those butchers are stopped! Get off my mountain!
Gorillas in the Mist, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, September 23rd in select areas. Open September 30th nationwide.
So as I mentioned, this is based off the work of Diane Fossey, and it follows Sigourney Weaver as Fossey and Brian Brown as photographer Bob Campbell, and it tells the story of Fossey, who comes to Africa to study the vanishing mountain gorillas and later fights to protect them. Most people forget that Sigourney Weaver had a pretty good stretch in the 80s, late 80s, where she was nominated for several Oscars. I mean, she was nominated for Aliens, and then she was nominated for this, and she was also nominated for Gorillas in the Mist, both in the same year. So that's pretty impressive stuff. It's a shame that she never won anything, but she was in some tough categories that year. I mean, in '86, she was in the same category as people like I can't remember who. I think it was Cher in '86. I need to do some research. Okay, in '86, she was up against Marley Matlin in Children of a Lesser God, which, yeah, that's going to be a tough one to really beat. And then in '88, she was nominated for Gorillas in the Mist, where she was in the same category as Jodie Foster for The Accused, which, again, hard to top that performance. And for Best Supporting Actress for Working Girl, she was in the same category with Gina Davis for The Accidental Tourist, which, again, a tough category, but that's one I probably thought she could have won easily. She was pretty good in Working Girl, but in here, she's given a really good performance, too. I mean, it's a really good performance boasted by the performance of both her and Brian Brown. I think they're both very well done, and they do a pretty good job of getting you into her story of why she wants to protect the gorilla so much, and to the point where it eventually ends up killing her in the process. Is when it's all said and done. Because she died only a couple years after this movie only a couple years before this movie came out in 1985, late '85 too. It's an interesting storyline. It's a film that really works because of the performances. It gets a little too preachy at times, but it does work on its own when it needs to be something. When it needs to get its point across, and I think it does it very well enough to really recommend it as it is. It's directed by Michael Apted. Michael Apted is a really solid director. We've talked about a lot of his works in the past and present. Yeah, can't recommend this movie enough. If you haven't seen Gorillas in the Mist, definitely check it out. It's definitely worth a watch. So with that said, that wraps up time about the movie's Flashback for this week. We'll flashback to September 16th, 1988, with only a couple of movies here. Most of them I've never even heard of, so we can get through that one pretty quickly. The Messenger of Death, Tougher Than Leather, Miles from Home, 7 Hours to Judgment, and The Prince of Pennsylvania. Nothing too significant. I think the top 11 films that weekend were all movies that had already been out for a long period of time. So that's one we can get through pretty quickly. So we'll get to that one next time. But until then, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of these, check out the playlist below. Check out the previous episode. And I'll see you guys next week. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.